This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, I'm excited once again to have a repeat guest with us on our podcast today. It's the first time we've ever done this, but this man just has too much to say to fit into one podcast. And so we have David Murrow back with us again. I interviewed him a while ago on his very influential book, Why Men Hate Going to Church. And lots of good stuff there, as we talked about. But he's got a new book coming out that is going to be very interesting. I've had a chance to read the manuscript before its release, and so I've read this book. And it's called Drowning in Screen Time, a lifeline for adults, parents, teachers, and ministers who want to reclaim their real lives. And so, David, welcome back to our podcast today.
Yeah, it's good to be with you again.
Now, Dave, you got lots of interesting statistics, a lot of alarming statistics, and insights, reports, and thoughts in this book as it comes out. But you begin your book by just kind of confessing your own addiction. You sort of come out of the closet here with us.
Yeah, right.
Tell us, because it's pretty innocent sounding, and yet I think a lot of us can identify with what you experienced.
Yeah, I'm the son of a screen addict. My father was that first generation of men who was mesmerized by television. In the Murrow house, if we were home and awake, the TV was on. We started every day with the Today Show, and we ended every day with the Tonight Show. And so television was just the background noise of my growing up, and as a result, I kind of hated it. It disgusted me. So I didn't watch much television. Ironically, I went into the television business. I got a degree in communications from Baylor University, got my first job in the TV business, and for 20 years, I produced probably as much television as I watched. I mean, I really didn't watch much TV. Well, then my addiction came calling in the form of a laptop computer and wireless internet. And I found myself, this was around 2003, 2004, when Wi-Fi became a thing. And I found myself spending more and more time in my easy chair in the evening, just surfing the web, and looking at different websites, and there was starting to be streaming video at that point, and I wasn't even looking at inappropriate content. This wasn't like a pornography thing or anything. It was just the amount of time I was spending on my computer, and time that I had at once spent in the past had spent with my family, or perhaps in prayer, or developing real life friendships. These things were being displaced by my screen time. So it took a family intervention on the part of my kids to say, "Dad, you're ignoring us." And and I began to hear stories of other men who were lost in video gaming and other pursuits. And then, of course, online porn was just a huge thing for a lot of men, where they were getting addicted to their screens. And so, having worked in the screen business for almost 4 decades now, I decided to go ahead and write a book from a Christian perspective, because I am a believer in Christ. There's a lot of good secular books, but not a ton of Christian books yet on this topic. And so I decided to write one specifically to Christians and talk about just the full gamut of issues that we're dealing with screens, and not just, pornography, but also the amount of time that we're giving to screens for supposedly good pursuits that are diverting us from our true mission here on earth.
Now, and so tell us, you list the average amount of screen time the average American watching now, because it's really amazing.
I can still hardly believe it myself, but the best number that we have recently came from Nielsen Media Research. Now, they're the gold standard of when it comes to screen research. They've been doing television research in the 50s. And they very confidently say that the average American spends 9 hours a day looking at their screens for entertainment. This doesn't include screen time for work or other required pursuits. So basically all Americans do anymore is get up, get on their screens in the morning, and then they work with their screens, and then when they come home, they watch television and surf the web, and all that adds up to 9 hours a day. And so basically it's gone from being something that we kind of did a little bit in the evening in the 1950s to pretty much all that we do these days.
And now you specifically use the word screen. You don't say they're cell phone or their laptop,
right.
and so what all is encompassed in the term screen?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is television is still the king of screen time.
Yeah.
Americans still watch more TV than anything else, which surprised me because, again, TV's not my thing. But the average American is watching about 4.5 hours of television a day. And so then the other screens that we watch, of course, are our computers, our tablets, and our phones. But what's interesting, the big shift came in 2007 when a skinny man in a black turtleneck walked across a stage in Cupertino, California, and introduced a device called the iPhone. Because up to this point, our screens were attached to the wall or attached to something else, or they were at least bulky enough to be on a laptop. But now, for the first time, people were carrying screens around in their pocket. And that's really what's contributed to the explosion of screen time. Because what we have now is a world where if we have a spare moment, we're on our screens. You see this in airports. When people are sitting at the baggage claim or they're waiting for their flight, what are they doing? No, they're not looking around. They're not engaged in conversation with their neighbor. They're on their screens. If you see people on a bus or a train, they're on their screens. If they're riding in a car with someone else, they're not talking to the person in the driver's seat. They're on their screens. So because the screen goes with us everywhere, we find it very hard to resist.
Well, to any one of us who've been in meetings, you're sitting around a boardroom table or some kind of setting, and now we're going to have a 15-minute break. And it used to be that you turned to the person at the table sitting next to you and you said, well, wasn't that good? Or what do you think of that? Now everybody in the room has immediately got their head down in their cell phone, checking to see what messages came in during that last hour. But you start off the book with 5 different parables, and we don't have time to unpack all of those, but I thought it was an interesting way of sort of introducing all the material that came afterward, and you have one about a fishbowl that I think is interesting. Why don't you unpack that one for us?
Well, I want you to picture a small glass fishbowl, and the fishbowl represents your total brain capacity. Now, inside the fishbowl are ping pong balls. And each ping pong ball represents something you need to think about: your finances, your goals, your relationships, your work, your career, etc. Every one of them is a ping pong ball. Or maybe it's your schedule, something you have to do during a day. Most days my fishbowl is pretty full. I've got a lot of things I need to do. In the times past, before we had portable screens, even the busiest person, the president of the United States, or president of a corporation, or a busy executive, or even a busy housewife, or whatever, there were always if you picture between the balls, there were little bits of airspace between the balls. That was our downtime. That was when our brain rested. That's when we thought of great thoughts, or that's when we maybe shot up a quick prayer to God, or we meditated very quickly. We had these breaks in our attention. Well, now that we carry smartphones around with us, we're not taking those breaks anywhere. We're never resting our brains. Our brains are under constant stimulation. It's like our brains are running a marathon every day. Because if we have a spare moment, we go to our phones. Now, there's a scientific reason for that. When our brains are, as humans, our brains are wired for novelty. And when we see something new, we experience pleasure. And that comes in the form of dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that causes pleasure for our brains. And so when we're surfing the web on our phones, or we're looking at Facebook or Instagram, or we're shooting off an email or something, we're looking for that novelty, that squirt of pleasure in our brains. And our brains are simply becoming overstimulated. They're becoming overtired because our brains were not wired for novelty. They were wired for monotony. That's how life has always been. And so we're seeing unprecedented levels of anxiety among young people that use their phones all the time. And people are saying, oh, people are anxious because they're being bullied online. Well, that's not really necessarily the reason. The reason they're so anxious is because they're constantly online and their brains are never resting. But all this constant screen use is drowning out spiritual disciplines we used to have, such as prayer and meditation. I can tell you, before I had a smartphone, I prayed more. Before I had a laptop, I prayed more in the morning. But now it's a lot more interesting to check my Facebook feed than it is to check in with my Creator. And so I'm confessing this to you right now as a weakness, and I think it's weakening the church as well.
And you talk about the fact that people like Facebook and so many of these social media organizations, they've learned a thing or two from the casino to addict people, to have them keep coming back. And it was interesting. You talked about, if you never won at the slot machines, it wouldn't take long before you realize, boy, every time I put a coin in there, I always lose. Why would I keep doing that? So they've devised a way to give you just enough wins periodically to keep you coming back and losing a lot more money. And some of that is kind of the way that some of the social media is wired as well. I don't know that we realize how many billions of dollars have been spent to get us addicted to social media.
Yes. And, first of all, I'm not a social media alarmist. I'm not going to, claim that the social media companies are evil or anything like that. They're just businessmen. They're just businesswomen. And their business is selling advertising. And so the way that their advertising becomes more valuable is to have people on their platform for longer. And so these savvy business people have adopted some of the technologies and the techniques that Las Vegas casinos use to keep you engaged. They know just how much good news and how much bad news to give you. They know just who to put in your feed to make you click and respond and reply. That's why on Facebook in particular, you tend to see the same people over and over again. Well, those are the people you've replied to in the past. And so Facebook is going to send you those people because they want you to stay engaged. They also know that outrage is a very good way to keep people engaged. Twitter is the outrage capital of the world right now. People get on there and they signal their virtue to one another, and they gather their tribe and say, "Oh, look at these people! How terrible they are. Look how good I am compared to them." And it's just this mutual grooming and approval and outrage machine. It's basically the publican and the Pharisee again. Lord, it's all these Pharisees on Twitter saying, "Lord, thank you for making me so smart and so righteous, and not like that other Republican or Democrat who's got all these terrible views." And it's a lot of ego there. So yeah, there's definitely some science that's gone into the design of these platforms to keep you clicking and swiping and outraged and unhappy, and because that's what causes people to watch, and that's what causes advertisers to want to advertise.
Well, and certainly there's increasing studies to show how the screen is affecting us. You mentioned just even things like the fact that we weigh more than we did even just 18, 20 years ago. A lot of folks aren't sleeping as well with the blue light that's bombarding our eyes even just before bedtime.
Yes.
And even our brain, I've got a book I wrote with my dad on leadership that with the revision is about 400 pages. And I've had pastors, I've had leaders who desperately needed to take their leadership to another level, but they could not. If literally their career depended upon it, they would never be able to get through a 400-page book, because we're used to reading, tweets at most maybe just a short blog, but to sit down and read an in-depth, extensive, deep thinking book is almost beyond the capacity of many people today. And a lot of that, I think, is because of the screens aren't really designed for that. You're not...
Well, yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons Christianity is under so much fire right now, is because to explain the truth claims of Christianity, you need time. You need nuance. It's very easy to tear down Christianity in 280 characters. If God, if there really was a loving God, why does he allow suffering? Okay. You can get that into 200. You can get that into a tweet. Okay. The explanation you can't do in 280 characters. The explanation makes sense. C.S. Lewis, Ravi Zacharias, there's some great thinkers who can lead us through, yes, this is the problem with pain and suffering. But you can't put that on Twitter. So these sorts of outlets that are based on small, short sharing of information, they discriminate, or I don't know if that's the word, but they militate against long, contemplative thought. And that's causing what I would say is a dumbing down of our culture and an unwillingness to probe ideas in depth. Because again, we're flitting from website to website like rats in search of cheese, looking for that dopamine hit. And if I'm going to read something, thick and involved, like, Richard Blackaby's new book or C.S. Lewis or whatever, I'm going to have to sit down and commit to staying with something for a while. And our brains just aren't, that we're raising a generation that's just not used to that.
Richard and Daniel Blackaby will be at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove on May 17th through 19th, 2021. The title of this event is On the Move, How God Increases Your Spiritual Influence. It was originally scheduled to be held this year, but due to COVID-19 has been rescheduled. You can find out more and register at thecove.org. Links will also be in the show notes.
And now you talk about warring tribes, and I wonder. I certainly social media has contributed to that. When like you said, Twitter really is designed for things to be black or white. You're for me or you're against me. But the nuance takes more time, and it seems like that middle ground is being lost. Now it's just all your friends like you and follow you and like what you post, and you all criticize what someone else posted. And
Right.
it seems like it's this polarization of society, in part, I think, is because that's social media is certainly playing a part in that.
Yeah, well, there's always been extreme views in the culture, but there's never been a way to get them out there. I think I use the example in the book. If you were an extreme right-winger in the 1970s, your only outlet was a monthly newsletter from the John Birch Society. And if you were an extreme left-winger, you waited for your monthly copy of the American Socialist. But the other 29 days of the month, you were exposed to more moderate content. Maybe some of it leaned a little bit left, some of it leaned a little bit right, but it wasn't as polarized as we have it today. Today, you can find the most incredible conspiracy theories on both the left and the right, and huge followings for those conspiracy theories. You can find tribes that will affirm you in, I use the example of a guy who claims to be a dragon. He's part of the otherkin movement. And, in times past, he couldn't have found a tribe. Now that we have online interaction, he's found people that are paying for his plastic surgery to turn him into a dragon, put horns on his head. And it's just what social media has done. It's allowed us to contact our old friends from high school, but it's also allowed extremists to find affirmation for their extreme views. And that's really the danger to society, is that we can really spin off out of control, and we can find a chorus that applauds us for doing so.
And just certainly speaking about danger, you do address pornography, and you also address predators, and really those are probably two of the more disturbing chapters in your book. And there's things you pull stuff out from your research that the average person like myself, I had no idea some of that stuff. It's you don't want to know about some of the stuff that goes on in those dark places, but in fact, I think you even have a warning at one point to say some of this is pretty disturbing. But you need to know this. I guess I'm thinking particularly with parents, and you especially at the end, you do give some practical guidance to parents, but there are some dangers there. I mean, men, and I know men that, I know one guy he keeps a flip phone because he can't trust himself with pornography. He got into it, and now he's trying to limit himself where it's not as accessible as it used to be. It's just opened up. If you have an addiction or a leaning in some ways, the screen is making every temptation that you might have much more accessible than it ever was before. And predators that might have had to be stalking street corners near the public school, now they can be on the other side of the country and stalking your teenage daughter, who you think is just upstairs in her bedroom right now.
Yeah, well, and you've just put your finger on it. Your child is in far more danger locked in her bedroom behind a locked door if she has an unmonitored internet-connected device than she would be that's in a public park, at 11 o'clock at night. She's far more, like thousands of times more likely to be contacted by a predator in her bedroom than she would be in a public park. It's interesting, society's gone absolutely bonkers on protecting children's physical safety. They're throwing parents in jail for letting their 10-year-olds play alone in a park. Yet we give our 7-year-olds unfiltered access to the internet and say, good luck. When the danger is much greater that they're going to be groomed or permanently, they're going to see things they can never unsee.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine the cascade of mental health issues that are going to be coming for when children see things and are exposed to ideas or possibly even people that are just terribly, bad for them. So yeah, parents, I mean, you don't need to be paranoid, but you need to be prepared. And one of the concrete things that I advise is even when your kids are, tiny or in the womb, you need to get a screen plan together for how you're going to deal with screen content, and then you need to be absolutely stick with it. Because even if your kids don't have internet connected devices, their friends do.
Yeah.
And you're going to need to be ready for them to be exposed to these things. And this availability it's not a good thing. And as Christians, we need to be discerning and we need to be prepared.
And as you say, I mean, these are neutral. These are tools. They're morally neutral. It's
Right.
like a hammer. It's a positive thing if you're building a house. It's a negative thing if you're hitting someone in the head with it.
Right.
It's just a neutral tool that can be abused. And for people like you and me, just because of the work we do, we monitor social media sites and things to get messages out for our ministries and our messages. And so I'm kind of like you. There's one or two shows on TV that I watch pretty well. Period. So I'm not a big TV watcher, but. And I wouldn't call myself necessarily a big, web surfer either. But you go to you posted something earlier in the day, and you see there's a bunch of comments, and you go to check those, and then someone else has posted something that's a diatribe, and you can't believe that person is coming out and speaking that way, and the next thing you know, 30 minutes has gone by that's been just completely wasted. And
right.
You think, I had so much I needed to do, and now I'm going to have to go to bed tonight, and I never did get that book read or that email answered, or but how much time did actually over the course of the day of just searching or just checking Facebook or whatever else, how much time ended up being just completely wasted with not an ounce of productivity at all to it. And so, I mean, even people like I'd say for myself, I'm not a paragon of virtue necessarily in that whole world, but I wouldn't see myself as someone that's just a video addict. I don't watch a lot of movies or anything, and yet I can see time be wasted pretty quickly as well. And so you have some real helpful suggestions. That I think just even, and that's why I say, even if you don't think you have a problem, even if you don't, you're not addicted to pornography or something like that, I think still what your book said to me was everybody, if you're going to operate in the modern world and have any kind of screen device at all, you've got to come up with a plan, and you've got to be proactive about how you approach that and not reactive. And so maybe just share just a couple of the just practical ways for the average person who just has a cell phone and a laptop, is on a couple of social media platforms. But what's just some counsel you'd give them, maybe just some practical things they could do to be healthy about their use in these things?
Yeah, well, let me start off by saying you and I are actually friends on Facebook. That's how we got acquainted.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That was. I'd say
so
some of the
good can
puns.
happen.
Well, some of the puns you post are pretty toxic. So I've thought about unfriending you.
Yeah, I got a message the other day from my oldest son about one of my puns, and I thought, oh, finally he's coming over, and he just said, "Dad, did you forget to take your medication?"
Yeah, they're pretty bad, but no, seriously, I would say that most people are spending more time on their screens than they realize. When we stand before the judgment throne of God, I don't want to give an account for my time and say, well, Lord, I really didn't have time to love my neighbor because I was watching, television or posting on Facebook trying to convince somebody to change their political views. There's just no value in that, as you said earlier. So one of the first things you need to do is install some sort of software that tells you how many hours you're spending, and just look at the truth. Every Apple device comes with a screen time monitor, and just turn it on. And every Sunday I get a report. And am I up? Am I down? How am I spending my time? If you do find that you're spending an inordinate amount of time on your devices, then you need to have the courage to come up with a plan. And, I'm going to be putting those on my new website, different plans that you can do to whittle down your screen time. Oftentimes you can solve the problem just by reclaiming those little moments in your life, like the airspace between the ping pong balls, as we were saying earlier. Problem is, people are pouring screen time in, and it's displacing those little, it's like pouring water on top of the ping pong balls. It's displacing those empty spaces in their time. If you can just reclaim those, like when you get to the baggage claim at the airport, instead of whipping out your phone, just look around at people and think about what you need to be doing, or pray for folks, or offer to help them with their bags. Just be the hands and feet of Jesus more consciously, instead of being absorbed in this artificial world. When you come home at night, actively, turn music on in the room instead of television. There's so many simple things that you can do, and I've packed my book with these sort of with these very, very easy to implement solutions that will help you reclaim more of your time. If you find yourself severely screen addicted, you may need to do a digital detox, and my book talks about how you can do that. Those you can get out of town, you can do them in town. There's lots of different people who are doing digital detoxes. I'm planning to be doing them in 2021, hopefully, if we can gather again after this virus is conquered. And we only have one life. We have our 70 years on this earth, and I want to use those years productively. I want to use them to benefit mankind, and that's my attitude, and I think that's the attitude of many Christians. And we want to use them in pursuit of the goals that Jesus has given us. And so it's incumbent upon us to use the majority of our time wisely, and that's time in the real world and not as much time in the screen world.
Well, and you talk about things like just taking a Sabbath of just turning off the cell phone, even for over a weekend, or certainly at meal times. I know that's one of the most troubling things. And you go to a restaurant and you see a couple eating out, and they're both looking at their cell phones, not talking to each other, and you just think, I don't know that we realize just how bad it is sometimes. There's
actually a word for that. It's called fubbing.
Oh,
and phone snubbing, fubbing.
Oh, okay.
And then there's even couples on dates where the guy, if it's not going right, the guy will excuse himself, go to the bathroom, and never come back. That's extreme fubbing. And he'll go and he'll swipe for another date. I mean, it's just the phones have completely, because they've given us such great access to each other, they are uprooting the natural social interactions that we've developed over the thousands of years. And we are ill prepared for a lot of these changes. So I would exercise extreme caution as you adopt new screen technologies, and you need to be very cognizant of the need to remain attached to real life. Because the people who know how to navigate real life are the people who are going to succeed at life and achieve the most in life and be the most satisfied in life, and really be the most productive for the kingdom of God.
Well,
those who still know how to do that.
And you talk a lot about just the way it's changing, the way we even just relate socially. And I know that a lot of parents are concerned about their kids who that they don't know how to almost talk face to face with friends anymore. People they just know how to text them or to Facebook time them or something. But I'll never forget my daughter when she was like a young teenager, had a bunch of her girlfriends over to the house, and I was going to drive all the kids home, and we're in a small town. I was just making the loop and dropping these kids off. So my daughter went with me, and I've got a car full of teenage girls, and no one says a word. They're just quiet. and drop them all off. I didn't know if they'd had a fight or something went south for them, and no one's talking. But we get them all dropped off. I go back to the house, and the next thing I see, my daughter is on her. She's typing away on her laptop. I said, "Well, who are you messaging?" Well, it was all those girls. I said, "Well, you were just in a car with them. You didn't say a word." But like she's typing frantically, and they're messaging away, and I just wondered what is happening to this generation that you could be literally in a car with someone and not say a word, and then spend 2 hours in a chat afterward on your laptop.
I was talking to a youth leader, and he said there's a real difference, and he's been a youth leader for many years, and he said just in the past 10 years, it used to be that the screen world was artificial and real life was the screen world was secondary and real life was primary. But in this generation of kids, screen life is primary and real life is secondary. And so when we ask them to put their phones down, we're asking them to leave what they perceive as real life as their priority and go into a world that feels artificial to them. Now, if that doesn't chill you to the bone, I mean, how are these kids going to interact with their bosses, with spouses, when everything they've done has been mediated through a screen? It's not going to be good for society. It's not going to be good for those kids, and it's certainly not going to be good for the kingdom.
No, and when a bunch of those media games and so on have been designed to help them win and be successful and always be the hero, and then they go into the real world that's not set up that way. That's one of the things that you put your finger on right there, is that the screen world is designed around our preferences, our desires. I mean, there are things called algorithms. And what algorithms do is, as we click on different things, or we look at different products, or we embrace different ideas online, the algorithms give us more of that. And they reinforce, because they're trying to sell us more stuff. They're trying to give us more things that we're interested in. And so what happens is we create what I call in the book a digital kingdom. And within the walls of that kingdom, everything tends to either agree with us or cause us to be outraged and respond. But we curate this kingdom. And so what we're seeing, we see the rise of what are called snowflake young individuals. These are kids who grew up in this digital world, a world that conformed to their desires, a world that only gives them what they preferred. And so when they get into the real world and they encounter attitudes and they encounter speakers that they don't agree with, they try to do in the real world what they were always doing in the screen world, and that's cancel. This is the origin of cancel culture, is they're trying to unfriend, unclick, not like, hide, because that's what you can do in the screen world. And so it's a very disturbing development. Kids believe in free speech as a principle, but they've been so trained by their screens to live within their digital kingdoms that when something comes into that kingdom that they want to expel, they exile it. Wow.
And as a result, they're becoming, snowflakes and not very resilient. And I'll bet you probably know some young people who would confirm that.
Yeah. Well, and tragically, you're seeing, especially among teenage girls, record-setting depression, suicide rates these days. And so much of that is linked in with, I think, in part, trying to navigate between this screen world and the real world. It's becoming very, very painful, very confusing to a lot of young people. You look at these kids that have a great, standard of living, and many have all the tools, all the toys, and yet severely depressed. And you know that so much of the screen time has convinced them that life should be one way, and then that's not how their real life is turning out. And so certainly lots of things to think about, and great new resource from a Christian perspective, lots of practical tools. David just has a way of always sort of zeroing right in on real issues that everybody knows just by experience to be true, that they're seeing and experiencing, and then just having some great ways of encapsulating those and helping come up with some approaches and answers. And so, David, this is always, it's good to talk with you and to hear just your perspective. I'm really excited about this new book coming out. We'll have all the ways to get that book in the show notes as well, so you can find a way to get hold of that. But and I would say certainly as a parent, just as a person that just wants to be in control of your life and not squander the most precious thing you have, which is your time. This is a great book to get, and just to take time to prayerfully pray through this and to think about it and take some time to evaluate. You may not, you might be, as he shared in his opening story in his book, you might not think that it's an issue for you, but take a look at the next report that comes out on how much time you spent on the screen, and it might appall you when you begin to think of other ways you might have used that same time. So, Dave, thanks for being with us, and I pray God blesses you and the ongoing ministry and this book, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you very much. And to your listeners, thank you. I should tell you, Richard wrote the foreword for my book.
Oh, yeah.
So a very good little foreword. So actually his wonderful prose appears before mine in the book. So if you want some good content, read the first part, and then you can struggle through the rest.
So there's at least one nugget in there, then you'll find.
There's
for
one
sure.
nugget in there written by a Blackaby, yeah. So
I was glad to do it, and I hope that this book gets a lot of reading and has a wide influence for years to come.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show and for helping with the book.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.